The transport ship Zorian Star was a massive vessel, a floating city among the stars. Inside, hundreds of aliens from different species filled the corridors, their voices blending into an unrecognizable hum. Some were diplomats, others traitors, and a few, like Lieutenant James Carter, were soldiers. James stepped inside the main seating area, his boots clicking against the polished metal floor. The air smelled faintly of oun and unfamiliar spices, a scent he had grown used to over the years. His body etched from exhaustion. The past mission had been long, brutal, and filled with too many memories. He'd rather forget. He scanned the room. Most seats were occupied, but one remained open near the center of the hall. It was beside its sorry diplomat, a tall, slender alien with deep blue skin, elongated limbs, and piercing silver eyes. Siri were known for their arrogance, their belief that they were superior to most species. James moved toward the seat, his face neutral as he reached for it. Thier raised a hand, blocking his way. The gesture was small, but the message was clear. "You cannot sit here," the alien said coldly. A heavy silence fell over the room. Nearby passengers turned to watch. Some smirked, others shifted uncomfortably. The air grew thick with unspoken tension. James didn't react, didn't argue. He simply tilted his head, studying the Solari. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded note, and slid it across the table between them. The ailer hesitated, his long fingers twitched. Before finally picking up the note, he unfolded it carefully, eye scanning the simple handwritten message. Inside then, his expression changed. His silver eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat, his fingers trembled slightly, as if the weight of the words pressed down on him like a physical force. Other aliens leaned forward, their curiosity growing. What had the human given him? Why? Proud auxiliary suddenly look afraid. James said nothing. He simply waited, watching. This realization dawned in the alien's gaze. The exiled diplomat swallowed hard, staring at the Sodders sitting across from him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he had just made a grave mistake. The note trembled in the Siler's hand. His silver eyes darted over the words again, as if rereading them would somehow change their meaning. But they didn't. The message remained the same. A deep push filled the transport ship's seating area. Whispers passed between alien passengers. They couldn't read the note, but they saw the way the auxiliary diplomat's confident posture had collapsed. Lieutenant James Carter sat motionless, his expression calm. He had seen this reaction before. The auxiliary fingers tightened around the note, knuckles turning pale against his deep blue skin. He cleared his throat, but his voice betrayed him, coming out uneven. "Is this true?" the diplomat finally asked, his words barely above a whisper. James didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back slightly, letting the silence stretch between them. The excel's breathing quickened, his eyes darted around the room, as if searching for support, but none of the other passengers spoke. James tapped a finger against the metal table. "I wouldn't lie about something like that." The auxiliary exhaled sharply and lowered his gaze. His once proud stance had crumbled, the arrogance that coated his every word before was gone, replaced by something else. Uncertainty. Across the room, an Aryan merchant covered in golden feathers whispered to his companion, a CC warrior, his scales glistening under the ship's artificial light, crossed his arms, observing the exchange with narrowed eyes. They all wanted to know what had the human written. The ailer hesitated, then gently placed the note on the table. With slow, deliberate movements, he slid it back toward James. "You should not carry such things openly," he murmured. James picked up the note, folded it neatly, and tucked it back into his pocket. His face remained unnerved, but inside, he knew what this moment meant. This Talari had been raised to believe in his own superiority. His people had whispered about humans as nothing more than myths, ghost stories from a forgotten past. But now he knew the truth. The auxiliary diplomat shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickered to the empty seat beside him, the same one he had just refused to. James slowly, he moved his hand away, a silent invitation. James didn't hesitate. He pulled out the chair and sat down. The watching aliens tensed, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The only sound was the soft hum of the ship's engines and the quiet murmur of passengers pretending not to stare. For a long moment, neither James nor the auxiliary spoke. Then, without looking up, the alien said, "You should not be here." James smirked slightly. "You should have thought about that before blocking my seat." The silence between James and the auxiliary diplomat stretched thick with unspoken tension. Across the transport ship's seating area, alien passengers changed glances, their curiosity growing by the second. The note had shaken the diplomat, and everyone wanted to know why. James could feel the weight of their stares, but he ignored them. Instead, he focused on the exiler watching the way his fingers twitched against the metal table, how his breathing had quickened ever so slightly. The diplomat's proud, confident demeanor had fractured, and James knew why. For years, the Ailer had treated humans as nothing more than legends, a race that had supposedly disappeared, wiped from existence. Their history books barely mentioned them, and when they did, it was always as a cautionary tale, a whisper of a species that had burned too bright and vanished into the dark. But now, a human soldier sat across from him, real and undeniable. The Aile's eyes darted to James's pocket, where the note had disappeared. He wanted to ask about it again. James could see it in his face, but pride held him back. Instead, the diplomat clenched his jaw and finally spoke. "Where did you get that?" His voice was quieter now, the arrogance from earlier replaced with something closer to fear. James tilted his head slightly. "You already know the answer." The diplomat's fingers curled into a fist, his sharp nails pressing into his palm. "No, that shouldn't exist anymore." James smirked. "And yet here we are across the room." The CAC warrior let out a low growl, his scaled tail flicking against the floor. The Avarian merchant ruffled his golden feathers, whispering to his companion. A pair of young traders, their insect-like antennae twitching, leaned forward slightly, their multifaceted eyes locked onto the exchange. The tension in the room thickened. The exiler diplomat exhaled slowly, as if trying to steady himself. He reached for a drink in front of him, took a small sip, then set it down without a sound. His fingers tapped against the table, his mind racing. Finally, he asked, "Do the others know?" James let out a soft chuckle. "You're not asking the right question." The Sari silver eyes locked onto his. "Then, what is the right question?" James leaned forward, slightly lowering his voice just enough that only the diplomat could hear. "You should be asking how many of us are left." The diplomat's body went rigid, his breathing halted for just a moment before he forced himself to relax. His hand trembled as he picked up his drink again. But when he brought it to his lips, he didn't sip. He just held it there, trying to mask his reaction. James watched him carefully. "You've been expanding your borders," he said casually, "moving into old territories, taking what doesn't belong to you." The diplomat's jaw tightened. That space was abandoned. James smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You're sure about that?" The diplomat didn't respond. Outside the large observation window of the transport ship, the vastness of space stretched endlessly. Stars shimmered like distant embers, and the swirling blue glow of a nearby nebula pulsed against the void. The exiler diplomat glanced at it, then back at James. "What do you want?" James exhaled slowly, then leaned back in his seat. "You already know the answer to that too." The diplomat swallowed hard, his throat working against the weight of realization pressing down on him. He had always believed the humanity was gone, erased from existence, never to return. Now, sitting across from him was proof that the galaxy had been wrong. Humanity wasn't extinct, they had just been waiting. The exiler diplomat's hands trembled slightly as he set his drink down, the metal cup making a soft clink against the table. The other passengers remained silent, watching, listening, none daring to interrupt. James Carter could see it in the diplomat's eyes, fear, uncertainty, realization. The Salari had always been confident in their power and their control over the galactic order. They had long dismissed humanity as nothing more than a whisper from the past, a myth exaggerated by old records. But now, sitting across from a living, breathing human soldier, the diplomat's certainty was unraveling. James didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. Finally, the Lari exhaled sharply and forced himself to speak. "You're making a mistake." His voice was quieter now, more measured. "If your kind still exists, you should stay hidden. If the Vorak Dominion finds out, they will erase you." James smirked. "You think they haven't already tried?" A hush fell over the room. The auxiliary stiffened, his silver eyes flickered with confusion. The Vorak Dominion was the largest military power in the galaxy, ruthless, efficient, unstoppable. If they had discovered remnants of humanity, there was no way humans could have survived. But James spoke with certainty. The diplomat's fingers twitched. "What are you saying?" James let the silence stretch before answering. "I'm saying you don't know what's really out there." The diplomat's throat tightened. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers burning into him, waiting for his reaction. Finally, he took a slow breath and reached for the note James had slipped him earlier. His fingers ran over the edge of the thin paper, the human relic, an artifact that should not exist. He read the words again. "The lost are never truly gone," a simple phrase. But now, it carried a weight that settled deep in his chest like a heavy stone. James watched him carefully. You sorry think you know everything about the galaxy. You believe that power is measured by fleet numbers and occupied worlds. He tilted his head slightly. But you've never faced an enemy like us. The diplomat swallowed hard. He wanted to argue. He wanted to deny it, but deep down something told him. James wasn't lying. The Vorak Dominion had been expanding aggressively into what was once known as human space. They had reported nothing but empty abandoned worlds, until their fleet started vanishing. No distress signals, no debris, no survivors, just silence. The Sari clenched his jaw. If you're really out there, why now? Why reveal yourselves? James' expression darkened. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because you stepped too far. The diplomat's breath hitched. James sat back, his eyes never leaving the alien's face. You thought we were a myth. You thought we were gone. But the moment the Vorak crossed into our territory, they woke something they can't control. The Ale's pulse pounded in his ears. He had to warn the council, but as he studied James' calm expression, a chilling thought crept into his mind. It was already too late. The Cellar diplomat sat frozen, gripping the thin piece of paper between his fingers. The words written on it burned in his mind over and over. The lost are never truly gone. It was impossible. Humans were supposed to be extinct, erased. Their worlds were nothing but ruins. Their fleets had long turned to dust. And yet this soldier sat before him, alive, calm, unshaken. James Carter leaned back in his seat, his expression unnerved around them. The tension in the room thickened. The other passengers had stopped pretending to mind their own business. They were listening, watching. The diplomat took a slow breath and forced himself to speak. You expect me to believe your people survived, that you're still out there? James tilted his head slightly. I don't expect anything. I'm just telling you the truth. The auxiliary's mind raised. If this was true, if humanity had really endured in the shadows, what else had they been hiding? He glanced around, noticing the SEL shifts in the posture of other aliens. Some looked skeptical, others, especially those from species that had suffered under the Vac Dominion, looked hopeful. Hope that was dangerous. The diplomat exhaled sharply. You don't understand what you're doing, human. If the Vorak Dominion finds out. James chuckled, a quiet, unsettling sound. Find out? He shook his head. They already know. The diplomat's blood ran cold. What do you mean? James' gaze darkened. They sent a fleet into our territory last week. A murmur spread through the room. The Vorak Dominion was known for its overwhelming military power. If they had sent a fleet, where was it? James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device. He tapped it once, and a holographic projection appeared above the table. A battlefield, no, a graveyard. The Ale's breath caught in his throat. The image showed wreckage, twisted metal, shattered halls, debris scattered across the void. And in the center of it all, a symbol painted on a ruined Vorak dreadnought, a symbol that should not exist. The Ninja of the Terran Defense Fleet GS filled the room. Some aliens recoiled in shock. Others whispered to each other in hushed panic voices. The Vorak were supposed to be unstoppable, but their fleet had been destroyed, utterly erased. The auxiliary diplomat's hands trembled. This is impossible. James slowly deactivated the hologram. His voice was calm, but his eyes carried a silent warning. Your people have a choice to make. The diplomat swallowed hard. A choice. James nodded. You can pretend you never saw this, ignore the truth, and hope the Vorak never push deeper. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Or you can start asking the right questions and realize just how little you actually know about us. The diplomat's heart pounded. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was a message, a warning. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy had to face a terrifying new reality. Humanity was back. Silence stretched between James and the Alar diplomat. The weight of the human's words settled over the room like a suffocating fog. The Vorak fleet had vanished. A Sibal thought lost to history, had reservist, and somehow against all logic humanity had returned. The diplomat's fingers twitched against the note. His mind screamed at him to deny it, to find a rational explanation. But there was none. The Vorak were powerful, but even their might had limits. He took a steadying breath. You're telling me the Vorak fleet is gone? James didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his uniform pocket and placed another device on the table. It was small, round, with a dull metallic finish. The diplomat's eyes narrowed as he recognized the design, a Vorak command. Inaya. He hesitated before picking it up. The weight was familiar, but something was wrong. He turned it over, and his breath hitched. It was scorched, melted along the edges, as if torn from a burning uniform. James finally spoke. They were warned. A murmur spread through the room again. The other passengers, still pretending not to listen, leaned in just a little closer. The diplomat clenched his jaw. If this is true, why reveal it to me? Why now? James studied him for a long moment, then without breaking eye contact he reached for his glass of water and took a slow sip. The deliberate motion sent an unspoken message. I'm not afraid. Finally, he set the glass down. Because the Vorak won't stop. The word sent a chill through the diplomat's veins. James continued, voice steady. They will come again, larger fleets, stronger weapons, more ruthless tactics. He tilted his head. And you need to ask yourself, when that happens, whose side do you want to be on? The diplomat felt his heart pound against his ribs. You want an alliance. James smiled, a small knowing smile. I want you to survive. The weight of the statement hung in the air. The diplomat looked around. Some of the passengers understood the implications. Others were still trying to process what they had just witnessed. James leaned back in his seat again. Arms crossed. You don't have to decide now. He gestured toward the insignia. But the Vorak will force you to sooner or later. The diplomat clenched his fist. The Vorak Dominion did not tolerate neutrality. If what James was saying was true, then war was inevitable. And if humanity was truly back, then the galaxy was about to change forever. You said. The diplomat's mind raced. The VOR fleet was gone. The humans, the myth, the legend, the long-extinct species had returned. And now James Carter sat across from him, as calm as a man discussing the weather, offering him a choice outside the transports. Reinforced windows, the stars stretched endlessly, cold and indifferent. But inside, the air was heavy with something unseen, something far more dangerous than warships or weapons. It was the weight of knowledge. The Vorak had picked a fight with ghosts. And the ghosts had answered. The insignia in the diplomat's hands felt heavier than before. It wasn't just a melted piece of metal. It was a warning. His claws tapped against the table, a nervous habit he had never been able to shake. What should he do? He could dismiss this human's words as deception, propaganda, a bluff meant to scare him into compliance. But James didn't look like a man who needed to bluff. The diplomat exhaled slowly. You expect me to take your word for it? James raised an eyebrow. No, I expect you to listen. And then the ship's alarm screamed to life. Passengers jolted upright. The soft hum of the engine shifted, turning into an urgent WHNE as red emergency lights flickered across the cabin. The intercom crackled. Unidentified vessels detected on intercept course. Multiple ships. Origin unknown. The diplomat's blood ran cold. What James didn't react with fear. Instead, he sighed, straightened his uniform, and muttered under his breath, right on time. He stood. I suggest you take a seat. Diplomat, you're about to see something you'll never forget. Outside shapes emerged from the void, sleek, dark, and silent. They moved with a grace no Vork's ship could match. Not military, not pirates, something else. The passengers held their breath as the first ship decloaked, and emblazoned on its hull, clear as day, was the mark of humanity. The alien diplomat's breath caught in his throat. He had seen warships before, massive Vorak dreadnoughts, sleek interceptor squadrons, even the Galactic Council's own security fleets. But this was different. The ship that had just decloaked was something out of legend, something that shouldn't exist. Midnight black armor, no visible weaponry, yet radiating an unmistakable aura of power. It didn't move like a machine. It glided like a predator stalking its prey in the vast empty dark. And then the others appeared. One by one, more ships materialized from the void, not with the harsh burst of engines, not with the erratic flicker of malfunctioning cloaks, but smoothly, silently, as if they had always been there, watching, waiting. The VOR forces, so proud, so certain of their dominance, had been caught in an invisible web, and now the spiders had shown themselves. A transmission flickered onto the ship's main screen. No encryption, no identification codes, just a single sentence: you were warned. The diplomat turned to James, his mind reeling. Who? What are you? James didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply looked at the terrified alien, his expression unreadable. We are what you try to forget. The human soldier took a step forward. For the first time in his life, the diplomat, a high-ranking official of an empire that spanned hundreds of worlds, felt truly small. James placed a hand on the diplomat's shoulder, his grip firm. You laughed at the myths, he said softly. But tell me, are you laughing now? Outside, the ships moved into formation, blotting out the stars. And in the heart of 5 space, the ghosts of humanity had returned.